What book has changed your life? I have a few of them, and I wanted to share them with you right now. I have 15 books that have helped shape my life and change my life. And behind me, there are hundreds of books. I like to listen to audiobooks as well. Do you like to listen to audiobooks? That's been like my favorite the past, I don't know, 5 years is to listen to audiobooks. Let me know in the comments what you prefer, ebooks, audiobooks, or paperback or hardback. Okay, for our first book, it's about damn time. You knew I was going to do it. This is my book that came out in 2020. And the reason I have it on my list is because it changed my life. It changed my life to have my own book out in the world, my own um my own calling card, something that talked about my life. So I talk about how I went from being homeless and on food stamps to raising $30 million and investing in hundreds of startups that are led by underestimated founders. And what I did, exactly what I did, how I did it, why I did it, and how you can do something similar in your life and change your life. And this has changed my life so immensely. When it came out during the pandemic. It came out during a time where paper was actually lacking. They didn't have enough paper to print all of the books that were on the schedule, but they chose to print my book at my publisher because it was so much about grit and resilience and getting through something really difficult that they felt that it would resonate. And boy, has it resonated. So many people come up to me on a daily basis or reach out to me on a daily basis to tell me something from this book that has helped shape them. And it just means the world to me. I don't think I'll ever have anything like this. You know, I'll never know what it's like to release a book, your first book, like you're supposed to. But I had this experience and I'll always hold it dear. And it also, at the end of it, has this like Q&A where it teaches you about venture capital, about starting your own company. There's so much value in this book. There's like a lot of humor in it, a lot of storytelling. I think you'll enjoy it. So this is the first book. All right, the second book that I have here that changed my life is Richard Branson's Losing My Virginity. And I got this actual copy is a gift from one of my birthdays that I got from my friend Christy. And this is a original version of it. It's like a first edition of it. So it's like loose in the paper and it's kind of beaten up, but it's the very first printing of it. Just years and years ago, like in the late 90s. And the reason I have this on my list is because since I was 15 and I learned about Richard Branson, I have been enamored by his story. And we don't talk much about him these days, especially in the US, but he is someone who was always, going against the grain, always had his own path. The judge, when he went to, he got arrested, and the judge said, "You're either going to end up in prison or you're going to be a millionaire." And he chose the millionaire and then the billionaire route. And he always has launches of his companies that are just outrageous and different and special. And I thought that was when I was younger, it was something that I gravitated towards because he was making so much money. He was so successful, but he seemed like he was having the time of his life every single day. And he's still here and still kicking and owns hundreds of companies have his name on it. So I would check him out if you're not as familiar with Richard Branson. He's British, he's an interesting guy. And this book has definitely helped shape my world of entrepreneurship. Another book I have here is actually not the right book because I looked for the book. This is by Oprah, The Path Made Clear. Now, while I do love this book, it's another book of hers that I actually consider helping shape my life. It's called What I Know for Sure by Oprah. What I Know for Sure. I read What I Know for Sure at least once a year, if not once, a couple of times a year, because every time I read it, it has a little different feeling to me, and it teaches you about resilience. It teaches you about if you're making money, if you're successful, it teaches you what to do. So if you've come into some money or you've started making money in a way that you have never before, if you're the only person in your family that's doing that, it teaches you some very practical things, believe it or not, for how you approach having money and keeping money. So it's really interesting in that regard. The next book is Roadie. This is by Matt McGinn. and My Life on the Road with Coldplay. Now, the reason I love this book is because I read it years and years ago, probably in my late 20s or early 30s. And it's really, really detailed. And if in case you don't know, I used to be a live music production coordinator, road manager, that type of thing. I was on the road with musicians. I kind of went from nothing to working with a band from Norway on the road in a van across the country. And I took that over years and years and years. I took that and turned that into working on international uh, tours of people that you absolutely know. And that was like in between the homelessness and then before the homelessness of late. It was a lot of life that I've lived. But this book helped me dream and it helped me imagine what my life would be. And I remember when I was reading this book, I was in Pearland and I was really depressed. And I wanted to be on the road. Like I wanted to be working on a tour. I thought that was going to be my life. And I tried to, I reached out to so many people. And this was before I had like the gigs, the real gigs. And it was just really cool to read this and then live life on the road and know that this was so similar to it. So you should read this even if you don't want to work on the road, read this to know what it's like for your favorite musician and your musician's team to be on the road. If you've ever wondered, you walked into a concert and you're like, how do they have all those lights up? How do they know what to do? How many people work on this? Like Taylor Swift, how does that go? If you read this, you'll know exactly how Taylor and Beyonce and Billy and all of those people, all of your faves, even the smaller bands that are just showing up to small theaters and small clubs. That's what I did, right? I worked there first. You'll know all about what they do and how they make that magic happen. And it's a very fun read to get that behind the scenes. The next book that helped me a ton was Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And this helped me when I was in Pflugerville, which is part of Austin, Texas. It was after Pearland. It was after I moved from uh, uh, living out of a motel with my mom. We moved into an Airbnb, and we still didn't have any money, but we had received a loan from Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI. I know that's a kind of a crazy sentence, but it's true. This was years and years ago, and we had enough to have the Airbnb for a few weeks and to figure some stuff out. And I was there trying to figure out what to do. I was having meetings, I was trying to figure out what to do in my life because I knew that, I had to figure something out. I was in my early 30s, nothing had been working, or mid 30s by that point. And I read this book, and I don't remember why I read this book or like what brought me to it, but I read this book and I started reading about men and women who were like against the beaten path. They were just not, they were to their, marching to their own drum. And they did something, they worked on something for years and years and years. And then one day they got this momentum, this break, and all of a sudden something happened to them. And I remember reading it, and they went from being just like the title suggests, they went from being just like everyone around them to being very special and spectacular. And the whole point of it was, and you can read about this if you're feeling that way about yourself, is that they always were. There was always something different about them, the way they operated, the way they thought, the way they envisioned their lives and the lives of other people was always different. They were always an outlier to become an outlier. And during that time, I remember thinking, he could have written about me. And you have to remember, I had very little money at the time. I was probably 33 or 34. I was I was living with my mom who was in her 60s. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I was very, very lost. But at the same time, I knew that I wanted to start a venture capital fund for underrepresented founders. And I knew that, and I had been working on that. And I knew that there was a reason that I was doing that against all odds. And so I had that in my mind while I was reading this book. And this book helped me dream bigger, and it helped me understand that I wasn't alone and helped me understand myself. So if you feel at all different from your peer group or from your family or from the people you work with, I want you to read this book because I think it'll help you understand who you are. It also helps you understand how to leverage certain things and kind of trains you to be an outlier if you want to get more sales, if you want to stand out in the crowd with your company, if you want to stand out in the crowd as you navigate your career. It's a really interesting book and it's jam-packed. So highly recommend. It's probably my favorite Malcolm book. The next book I'm going to show you is Their Eyes Were Watching God. Now, I read this. So this is right. I was in junior high and we had an English teacher. I think you pronounced her name Kleiner, Mrs. Kleiner. I think that's how you pronounced it. And she was interesting. People would kind of make fun of her hair because she had like kind of wild hair. I can relate. People would kind of there was like this lore that she had baked her dogs in the stove. You know, there was like a silly, stupid junior high rumor that everybody learned when you went to her class. And of course, she didn't do that. Of course, that wasn't the case. But we always had to have this thing we could giggle about. And I remember, so she was a white woman and I was one of the only Black people in my class. Not that there were a lot of Black people in my school, but in my class I was, and this was like an honors English class, so an advanced class. And I was just really like bored. I remember we read Chaucer, we read Tale of Two Cities. I was just really, really bored. And I didn't realize that I was bored because I was probably reading about people that I didn't relate to, even as ancestors. And she realized it. So one day she came to me, she kept me after class, and I thought I was in trouble, but I wasn't. And she said, Arlan, I have a special book for you and I want you to read it. And it's my copy of the book. And she handed me this book. A different copy was hardback and it was very well read and had notes in it and bent pages. And she said, I want you to read this and tell me what you think. I think this is like, I'm only giving this to you and I think you would like it. And she gave it to me and I started reading it. And it was the most beautiful prose I'd ever read in my young life. I was so like enamored by this book, by every word that Zora spoke, the way she painted. I thought, oh, she's painting with words. And it opened my mind and in a very real way helped to transform my life because then I became someone who knew that reading was something that could be an escape, it could be a gateway, it could be freedom, it could be a lot of things. And I was not, things were tough at home. And this helped me in so many ways. So I appreciate Mrs. Kleiner. I don't know if you're still living, but if her children are there, she was at Lake Highlands Junior High in the 90s, and she helped to shape me, even though she probably does not realize it. The next book in the same vein is Diana Ross's memoir, Secrets of a Sparrow. And I know His Eyes on the Sparrow is like a hymnal. Um, this book is a biography. The reason this book touched me is two reasons. One is I realized that Diana Ross, and this she's for anybody who doesn't know Diana Ross, but she's Tracy Ellis Ross's mother. If that helps you. Incredible trailblazing singer and performer. And everybody from Beyonce to Janet was influenced by her. I realized she was in a different time, in a different era where she didn't have as much control over things. But this woman had such business acumen. She was such a business person at her core, and she stood up for herself, and she came from very meager means. She says in this book that she hates the phrase rags to riches because she was never raggedy. But she was very, very poor when she was younger. And then she built and built and built and built a legacy. She's still living and she's still with us. She's still performing. I think she's in her 80s and just a powerhouse. And I just love this. And so this book not only taught me about business, more about business, But what it taught me was business from a Black woman's point of view, which is very important to someone to be represented. But it also taught me I love nonfiction. This was the turning point for me for nonfiction, believe it or not. I realized, oh, I love to read. It's not that I get bored by fiction or I can't read or I don't want to read. It's that I love to read, but I love to read more so about real people and help apply it to myself. The next book that was a turning point in my life was Venture Deals by Brad Feld and Jason Mendelson. They are venture capitalists that run a fund called Foundry Group. They are now investors in my fund, but when I first read this years and years ago, they certainly were not. They didn't even know me. And Brad Feld in particular has been someone who's been extremely helpful in my life and to thousands and thousands of investors and founders, either in person or like for real, directly, or through his many, many, many books. Venture Deals is actually meant for founders of companies who want to raise venture capital. It's not meant necessarily for investors or venture capitalists. And if you see, it says be smarter than your lawyer and venture capitalist. It's very cool and very cheeky. So this essentially, anybody who comes to me and says, how do I become an investor? How do I learn how to invest in companies? How do I learn how to negotiate with an investor if I'm a founder? This is that book. This is that book. If nothing else, if you're a founder who is in the venture capital space, in the market for venture capital, which should only be a few percentage points of us all, this is the book you need to read. And there's been updates. This is a fourth edition. There may even be a fifth edition, but try to get the most recent one because they are updated. This is the book. I read this before I became a VC. And it helped me understand so much going into it that I was prepared. So it's heavy, right? So I mean, it's dense, I should say. There's a lot of information. So you read it once just to soak it in. Don't try to learn everything and understand everything. And then you come back to it as a reference point. But this will help you understand all these different terms and what people are doing. And by the time you read the end of this, you can either negotiate with the venture capitalist or you can make venture capital investments. You'll know exactly what's going on. So that helped me. Then this one, in the same vein, The Business of Venture Capital. This one is, let me see if I can get it in focus. Probably not. Okay, let's see if you can see. So Mahindra Ramzagani, that is the author of this book, The Business of Venture Capital. This book is very, very long. It is like, I think it costs more than $100. And I got this after I got my first few investors because this book is like where Venture Deals gives you a great introduction. You can only read Venture Deals and be on your way for sure. This is if you are thinking of starting your own venture fund. If you're thinking of starting your own venture fund or you've already started your own venture fund and you need to know more because there aren't really a lot of schools and a lot of courses about this. There's some, but they're not a lot. If you really, really want to know, you get this book and it's like having a course book. And I mean, it is dense. It is dense. It is, I'm going to say 400, it's 450 pages. And it's a large, large book with small, small writing. But this is the book to have on your bookshelf at your ready if you are starting a venture fund, a family office, even a more serious angel kind of career that you want. Lost and Founder by Rand Fishkin. Now, Rand Fishkin is a friend of mine. He's this kind of a cult hero to a lot of entrepreneurs who know his kind of vibe. And I think this book is one of the least, like the most underrated entrepreneur books of all time. I have read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of business books, and this book is probably the top 5. It's so, so, so good, and it's real. He talks about building his company to be worth millions, revenue in the millions, raising millions of dollars, worth so much money. And then he talks about all the things that went wrong, all the things that he did poorly, and the things that got messed up, and why he did those things, why he made those decisions, and how you can use his mistakes and the things he did well to make sure that you have a more smooth entrepreneurial journey. It makes you feel like you're not alone, it makes you feel seen, and it helps you see around corners so you don't make the same mistakes that he may have made. I love, love, love this book. Thanks, Rand, for writing it. We should all be millionaires. Rachel Rogers. I mean, this came out in the last 2 or 3 years. You got to have this book. This book changed my life because it helped shape my life because it came out after, I think it came out after my book, my first book. Rachel blew the roof off when it came to publishing for Black women, when it came to creating a book. First of all, this book is so well written. It feels like she's talking to you at a dining table and just reading you and telling you exactly what you need in your life. The first half of it tells her story, and it's so relatable, and it tells her, like a story about when she tried to cash a $5,000 check and she couldn't at her bank because she had such a bad banking relationship and she needed that money desperately. It talks about how she became a lawyer and why she became a lawyer, growing up in a mixed race family as a mixed race person. She talks all about these things that so many people understand. And the second half really is just like, this is how you make your first $10,000 step by step by step. This is what you do when you have that money. This is what you do when, this is how you live, and what happens when someone makes 100,000 and makes a million. This is what you do step by step by step. And it's like, it's so cool. Like, it's such a great book. And then on top of that, the way that she rolled it out, the way she promoted it, the way that it resonated with people at the right time, she has sold 6 figures of these. Like, it's almost impossible to sell 100,000 plus of a book, but she's way beyond that at last count. That's so amazing. So she set the tone for so many people to be able to publish their books, because all they had to say was, look at Rachel Rogers, look what she did. And there's so many Black women who probably got their book deals because Rachel Rogers had hers. I'm just going to say it. All right. This one, Buy Back Your Time. And I'm actually going to do them together because they're so related. So Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell and Clockwork by Mike Michalowicz. They were written 10 years apart. Buy Back Your Time came out more recently. They were written 10 years apart. They're both blue. They're both about the same thing. Mike says, design your business to run itself. Dan says, buy back your time, get unstuck, reclaim your freedom, and build your empire. I believe that Dan was inspired by Mike. And if you read, what I did was about a year and a half ago, I read both books at the same time. I found them both at the same time, and I listened to them on audio, and I would just go back and forth and back and forth, one chapter, then one chapter, one chapter, then one chapter. And they were both hyping me up so much to change my life and not be so stressed. What these two books are about, taking your company that you have now and not being beholden to the company, not having to spend every waking hour working on your company, having a thriving company that is successful, that helps other people, that is valuable, that you maybe can even sell in the future, but you don't have to work on every single thing yourself. It allows you, not only gives you the permission to make sure that you don't spend every waking hour on your company and that you learn how to hire and delegate, but it teaches you exactly how. Exactly how. And I mean, it has different graphs and different lists and different this, and each chapter is, okay, now you're going to do this, now you're going to do that, now you're going to do this. These two books made it to my list because they helped me find a time freedom that I didn't have before and give myself permission not to do everything. The next book on the list is probably the most important book in my opinion, just for me, it's called This Naked Mind, Control Alcohol by Annie Grace. Annie Grace, she saved my life. Annie Grace saved my life. And she knows it. I've met her. We're buddies now. I had a problem with alcohol since I was 21. For 15 years, I drank every single day. There was 1.5 years in between all of that I did quit, but it was miserable because I didn't know how to quit. It was absolutely miserable. And I started drinking again. And so I drank for 15 years every single day. The only time I didn't drink is if I was really, really sick from something else, like a cold or something. But I drank every day, and I was dying. I was drinking myself to death, and I was not well. And I wanted to, I'm just realizing I have all of this here because Annie's so wonderful. She wrote all of that to me. Let me see what it says. The fact that we are sharing a stage at this startup conference is a pinch me moment, she says. I am so grateful, and there are no words to describe how I feel about how each of our work empowers each other's missions. Love, Annie Grace. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I brought her to a conference, and we had an amazing, amazing conference and book signing together a couple of years ago. Okay, so this book came along right when I was thinking about going to rehab, and I was going to have to like stop my whole life. I had just raised for the fund. I had been, in the business for a couple of years, and I was going to have to pause all of that. And I had already hurt my partner's feelings, and scared my partner, Anna, and I knew I needed to change, or I was going to probably pass away, or at least be really sick for the rest of my life. And one day I was on Amazon, and I said, well, let me just find if there's like an audiobook I can read just as one last effort. And there were like 20 of them. And I saw this one, and there was just something about Annie's name. It was about the name of the book, This Naked Mind, that was interesting. And the whole premise was that it helps you kind of wipe away what you think about alcohol and your relationship with alcohol and replace it with like healthier, more realistic things. And I thought that was interesting and could be an interesting experiment. Didn't think it was going to work at all, but I thought it'd be interesting to listen to. So I listened to it for 5 days, and I haven't had a drop of alcohol that I poured since then. The reason I say it that way is because twice somebody has put it into my dessert accidentally, but that does not count. So I have never had a drop of alcohol since this 5-day online. I suggest you do the audio if you're at all interested in cutting back on alcohol or quitting altogether. The next book is Your First Million. This is the book that came out just a few months ago. This is my second book, and it teaches you how to make your first million. It's also the name of this YouTube channel and the name of my events that I put on. And this book was very special to me. It was confirmation that I was an author, not just one fluke, not just one like blip on the radar, that I'm an author and that I'll continue to write books. And it teaches you how to go from scratch, from nothing, from making less than $5,000 a month to making $1 million over just a few years. And what's really cool is the in between. $1 million in a few years is very cool, but it's a little far away. What's fun is, how do you get the first 5,000, the 10,000, the 20,000? How do you make those? You take this book and you take We Should All Be Millionaires by Rachel Rogers that I showed earlier, and you can do it all. And I want to make sure that you know exactly how you can make your first $10,000. Make sure you check out this video so that you can get your next $10,000 or your first $10,000.